Okay, ready to learn.
Yeah, good
Kunlen and the
morning.
Black Gemara. We are up to Dav Chov Daled Amud Aleph. We're middle discussing the protocol, what happened when the witnesses came forward to the Bezdin to testify regarding the new moon. So we said that the first group is interrogated properly, and then all the other agents are just not interrogated, but just questioned, generally speaking, so that they should all feel that they've contributed. So they should keep on coming again. Okay, so now we also learned that there were certain things that testimony we knew. We had our different tests to determine whether the agent were telling the truth or not telling the truth. We're asking different questions. The Gemara continues. This is about 9 lines from the top of the page. Tana Rabbanan. We learned what Inu Bamai. What happened? The agent said we didn't see the moon directly. We just saw a reflection of it in the water. Or Inu Bashoshi, so we saw it through a glass, let's say lantern. Either we saw it through a glass, or we saw again through looking through a glass, or in fact, there's a shaila in the Chuvas, if you use glasses, whether that's an issue or not. I think what brachas there. So others learn there was talking about here if you saw a reflection of it on the glass. We saw it through the clouds. In all of these cases, you cannot testify because you didn't see the proper moon. What about chetzia b'mayim, the chetzia b'odim? Well, chetzia, we saw half the moon properly, or half the moon we saw covered by the clouds, or half the moon we saw, reflecting the water was only part of it. In all of these cases, is then aim eating love. And again, you cannot testify in that as well. Says the Gemara. Does it make sense? If you told me that you saw the entire moon, it's not good enough. If you saw only half the moon, of course it's not good enough. If you saw the full moon on reflection, you tell me it's not good enough. If you saw only half of the moon crescent, you tell me what? Of course it's not good. What about chetzia b'mayim, chetzia b'rikia, chetzia b'avim, and chetzia b'rikia? Let's say you saw half of it reflected in the water, and half of it you saw in the sky, or half of it you saw, let's say, through glass, and the other half you saw properly. In all these cases, you cannot testify on that person. You cannot testify. You have to see the entire moon. What have we learned? That's why when the cloud cover over the moon, we cannot bench the chodesh either. And it seems to me that even half of covered by the cloud, you cannot bench. You have to see the moon itself, the entire moon, at least for an instant. So we learned. What happens? We saw the cloud, and then let's say we saw it one night, and then we didn't see it the next night. Aim inin olav. You cannot testify out of it. You cannot testify. Says the Gemara. I understand. But understand, you have to see it the whole time. If they saw it, what does it matter if they didn't see it afterwards? The fact that they saw it. This is what we mean to say. We weren't out there looking for the new moon. We just happened to, look up, and suddenly we saw the crescent. And then when we decided, let's look again, then we decided deliberately to look at it just to make sure we can come and say, hey, we didn't see it anymore. Then you cannot testify. You know why? My timer. We can say that what you actually saw was, let's say, the peripheral of your eye, you saw something that was a figment of imagination. We can say, you just saw perhaps, the cloud itself, and for some reason or other, you just saw part of the cloud, and the cloud was shaped a little like the moon. You thought that was the moon, because you weren't really out there looking for the moon. That's why it's not a valid Eidus. Okay, then we continue. So after the Eidus comes along, the Reish Bezdin then declares, okay, there's just Chodesh today, Mekudesh, and everyone answers response twice. Mekudesh, most they have to say twice. According to this Tana, whether the moon is seen in its time, it makes no difference if you're Mekadesh the 30th day of the month or the 31st day of the month. In both cases, Mekachin, you declare officially it's Mekudesh. No. If the Chodesh is delayed by a day to the 31st day, There's no point in being Mekadosh already because it was already Mekudesh. The Eibishter was Mekadosh before. That since we weren't Mekadosh on the 30th day, then the Eibishter naturally can't go any further than the 31st day. So as if the Eibishter was Mekadosh. Says the Gemara, let's go through this. How do you know? How do you know that? Says the Gemara, how do you know the Bezin has to declare Chedesh? Know that. Moshe spoke about the Moed Hashem Mekancha. Bezin Oimer Mekudesh. The Bezin has to declare officially Mekudesh. But then the Mishnah said, "V'chola Amoinin Achra Mekudesh Mekudesh." Everybody has to respond twice Mekudesh. Why? You know how do you know that? It says that you should call them Korebe Atem. That you, the people. So first of all, how many people have to answer? Before we get to the double, how many you have to answer? But it says Tikru Oisam. We read as it says Tikru Atem. It's missing above. So Tikru Atem, that you should call out. I mean, who's in plural? The public. Then Haino twice. They should say, they should all say, yes, these are our Yom Tov. The Kuddush, says in Lamali, you want to say twice. It says Mikro'ei Kodesh, it says twice. Mikro'ei, it was calling out, it says in plural, as if to say, if they're declare twice, it is Kodesh. Rabbi argues in the Mishnah. Our Mishnah says in every instance you always have to declare as Kodesh. Only if you bring it forward, only if you make it early. But if you're waiting for the full 31st day, then the Eibush already is Mekadosh. Plainly says Bismanoi ain't Mekachin. He holds exactly the opposite. If it's the 30th day, you're not Mekadosh. If it's the 31st, then you're Mekadosh. So we actually have three opinions here. The Tanna Mishnah holds, regardless of when Rosh Chodesh is, Bezin always has to scream up Kodesh. According to Rabbi Lazar Tzaddik, only if it's on the 30th day. So the 31st day, you can't get Shuvah Shemayim. According to Plainway, just the opposite. Only on the 31st day, you have to declare Mekudesh. The third day, you don't declare Mekudesh. Rabbi Shimon says, Benkach, ein Mekachin Oisai. Regardless, whatever it is, you're not Mekadosh. He says, you don't have to go through this procedure here where the Bezdin declares Mekudesh on the people. It's a fourth opinion. And why not? Because it says in the Pasuk, it says, "V'kidashtem eshnasa chamishim shani matzim mekadosh." Only when it comes to Yevul, you have to declare it's mekudesh. V'kidashtem. We have mekadosh chadashim, not months. I mean, there's more halacha. Rav Lozer tzaddik. Halacha is actually Rav tzaddik that a 30-day month. That's when you. If the 30th day is Rosh Chodesh, that's when you declare it. If the 31st day is Rosh Chodesh, you don't declare it. You can't keep Shuvah Shemayim. I'll actually bring a brayso that supports that. It says, Bezdin, if the Bezdin saw the Chol Yisrael, it says later on, we learned actually, if Bezdin saw the Chol Yisrael, if the Bezdin, all the Eden, they all saw it. So everybody saw the new moon already. But the Eidim were interrogated, but they didn't have a chance to declare it as Chodesh, and it was dark then the following night. We have no choice. Rosh Chodesh will be the 31st day. So the only thing it says he have to do is automatically the Rosh Chodesh 31st day. It doesn't say Bezin has to declare it. Because if it does, the bishop should have said, or something. You should wait, what do you call it? That you should be Mekadosh it. It just says Mu'uber is Mu'uber. So we see from here what? So we see from here, it says Abaye that you don't. If it's the 31st day, you don't have to declare Rosh Chodesh. If it's a 30th day, like the laws of Tzaddik, you declare Rosh Chodesh. But the 31st day, it's just Mu'uber. So it seems to me Mu'uber in that it automatically becomes Rosh Chodesh. I mean, they don't have to. Doesn't say you're going to be Mekadosh tomorrow. It just says it's Mu'uber, as if it's automatic. Isn't that a right to the laws of Tzaddik? No, really, they can Kaddish tomorrow as well. But there's actually the Chiddush is that you wait till tomorrow to the Chiddush. That's what we're mentioning here. Mu'uber is no, really, you have to make Kaddish as well. But there's a Chiddush in Mu'uber. What is that? I would have thought, Hoyil B'ru'u Bezin. Since the Bezin saw the Chol Yisrael, Ifarsamei, maybe everybody already knows that the new moon already exists. The moon is large enough that everybody saw it. It was visible to everybody. So therefore, everyone knows that it's Chodesh is today. Maybe you shouldn't even delay till 31st because everybody saw the new moon, so it's good enough. Kamashla, no, it isn't good enough. And because Bezin didn't declare it's Chodesh, Therefore, you have to wait till the following day, or because it is a sit down, you have to conclude. You have, if they would say just, we would have thought that if you would say that tomorrow Bezin's Mekadosh, we would have thought that maybe Rosh Chodesh came in yesterday, and Bezin tomorrow will tell you that yesterday was Rosh Chodesh. So that's why I say Ibruha. We have to add an extra day because Bezin didn't conclude the process. There's no Raif in one way or another, even though the halacha is like Rabbi Lozer ben Tzaddik, that the only time they declared Mekadosh is if it's a short month or it's a long month, quite Kitchur Shemai. Now the Mishnah continues, in addition to just asking all those questions we had before, is the moon before the sun, behind the sun, north, south, and all that. Rabbi Gamliel also had the Mus Sudas Levana Ha'il Loy Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel actually had replicas of the moon, and because some people came in and they didn't know how to express themselves, articulate themselves, he would have different shapes. He would say, is this what it looked like? Is this what it looked like? And we had the beginning of the moon was facing the sun or not. They didn't really understand. So he would have the crescent, the moon crescent, and show the sun and say, so tell me which direction was the moon, and so on, to make it easier for them, for the Adam to express themselves. So, and obviously the Gemara will digress to talk about whether you're allowed to have these kind of sculptures or forms. Is a question of Avodah Zarah or Pes. So again, the most so there's Levana that had the form of the moon. Gamliel had the tabla on a board over Kaisel on his wall, Baliosa in his attic. He would show it to the ordinary people. Is this what you saw? Is that what you saw? Says the Gemara, first of all, Mishari, how can Gamliel actually own these kind of forms? The Haksiv, didn't we learn? It says in the Pasuk, Leisas and Iti, you shouldn't make with me Elahei Chesav Elahei Zov. So we dashen Leisas and Kidmus Shamoshay. Don't make forms. If we say that Iti means with me, things that are with me, not only don't Chas V'Shalom, have idols, but don't make any of the forms that are with the Eibishter, Shemaim. So you're not allowed to have them. So how can you have a replica of the moon, the sun? Abaye is going to say that this, even though halachically not correct, but at least this brisa you cannot bring any question, because the brisa is meaning you cannot build an exact replica. So couldn't be talking about the moon and the sun, because how can anybody build a replica of the moon, or exact replica, dimensions as well, of the moon and the sun? So only those kind of shamoshim which you can build exact replicas. In the time you learn, for example, the base of Mikdash. Lo yasa adam bayis. A person should not build his house tablet heichel to be exactly like the heichel of the base of Mikdash, or a ksadra, a veranda, tavnis ulam that looks like the ulam. Now the ulam was that front antechamber, but the ulam actually had a fourth wall. But because the opening was so wide, you didn't even notice there was a wall then extending from the opening. You didn't even notice that there was flanked on both sides by a wall. So it's like the fourth side is open, and like Sadra by definition is three walls, and the fourth side is open. So don't build an exact replica of the same dimensions. Shulchan keneged shulchan. You're not allowed to build a shulchan against a shulchan. A menoida keneged menoida. You're not allowed to build a menoida that's an exact replica of the base of Mikdash. I will also, but you could make shulchan misha. You can have a menoida 5, shisha 6, or shmoina 8. In fact, one of the answers why Hanukkah is 8 nights, when in fact the nest was only 7 nights, because they found one jug of oil was sufficient to burn for 1 night, and it lasted for 8, so the nest was only 7. One of the answers given is, you're right, but because then we would have to have a menorah of 7 candelabras, and you're not allowed to have a replica of the base of Mikdash, so therefore we had to make it 8. But if you make slight variations like 5, 6, or 8, but the shoshiva lo yasa. Exact replicas you're not going to make. Now, because you cannot make other metals as well, because technically the menorah doesn't have to be made out of gold. It could have been made out of other metals as well. Because we darshan, as the machlek is interesting how we dash. It says you should make a menorah, which is a cloth. It doesn't give you any description of the material, so that's a cloth. Yes, it's inclusive. Then it says zav gold, tar, so therefore that's a prat. And then it says mikshate asa, you should make it one of pieces. Again, it chazav kolos, it's a cloud prat, a cloud. If you learn a cloud prat, a cloud, then it has to be similar to the prat, and it has to be some kind of metal material. So it can be gold, it can be metal. But there's another way of learning it. Another way of learning it is ribui miyud ribui. And that is that ribui includes everything. Miyud includes, limits it to include only things which are similar to the miyud, which is metals. And then you have another ribui which comes to add further things, except that which is the furthest, the furthest thing that's similar to it, or dissimilar. So therefore, it includes even wood. You cannot have clay. So that's the two opinions here. So the first opinion says you can have any metal. Even furthermore, after lates, he learns that you can even have wood. Yasi should make it. You should make it because that's the Chashmonaim did it. So they're telling him, so you're bringing a raya that the Chashmonaim, when they came in, they built them out of wood. That's what you want to say. You should know, the truth of the matter is, it's made out of metal. The chipum, but what they covered it with bats, they covered it with tin. And tin, as it ages, from a distance, it looks like wood. And therefore you thought it was wood. It was never wood. Yeah, it can only be made out of some kind of metal material. Then the Chashmonaim Hashidu, when they finally settled down and they had some money, also Shekesem and silver, Chazer Rashim came rich again, also Shemen gold. So Abaye says there is nothing wrong with making the moon and the sun, because when it says Leisasun iti, things that are with me, it's only making exact replicas. And exact replicas cannot cover the moon and the sun. Says the Gemara, but I'll bring another price that covers even that. So what are you arguing? You're arguing that if you make a something which is not exact replica, you're allowed to. V'hatanya, didn't we learn another price? Using the same pasuk, Leisasun iti, don't make things with me. Leisasun kidmus shamoshay hamishamshil lefanai b'moreh. You gave examples only of things that are down here that are very finite, like building replicas of the Beis Hamikdash or parts of the Beis Hamikdash. But this Brayta says you're not allowed to build replicas of my shamoshim b'moreh, above, obviously to the sun and the moon. So even though it's not an exact replica, nevertheless it's forbidden. The Torah again said this Brayta still doesn't really concern me. Why not? Because if all I had is a Brayta, I would again limit it. We have the four faces of the Merkava, and one of them is the face of a human as well. That's what you're not allowed to do. When it's a b'morim, it's also above, and because it's also above, you're not allowed to do that. But not talking about the moon and the sun. We're not talking about that at all. It talks about there was an aryeh, there was a nesher, there was an eagle, and then there was a shoir, and then there's Pnei Adam. So you're not allowed to build that replica of those four together. But the moon and the sun, that you could. So according to what you tell me right now, is based on what you just said, that the only time it's forbidden seems Pnei Adam is if it's joined with a Pnei Shoir, a Pnei Aryeh, and a Pnei Nesher. Out parts of Adam l'chudei tishrei, you should be able to make the form of a person on its own, and yet, according to you, because only four is forbidden. Alamatanya, why did we learn Kol HaPartzuf is Mator Chutz parts of Adam? Why is it we learned that you're allowed to make any form you want except the form of a human face? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Brei Ravidi, B'Pirkei D'Abaye Shvili. I know the answer just from learning in Yeshiva of Abaye. Shemila Leisasun iti Leisasun oisi. He's saying here, it says Leisasun, but you know why? There's a separate Isser for a human form, and that is Leisasun iti. It says, don't make with me, and Mitashin Leisasun oisi. Don't make like me. The Eibishter once said that the form on the kisei is like an Adam. So therefore, if you make it as the mus of an Adam, it's like making it mus of the Eibishter. So therefore, a human on its own is forbidden. So what's he talking about? Then you're not allowed to make four faces. If once you make a face of a human, it's forbidden. So we're saying no. So Taisus gives an answer that when is a human face forbidden? Only if it's on its own, not if it's with others. By the way, there's a big machlekes in Poskim here when we say now to make the form of a person. Are we talking about just the face or the dafka and the entire body? But if it's just the face, you're allowed to. And the sculpture of just the face, you're allowed to. He says the ignore. And so you're telling me that what? But the moon and the sun, you're still arguing that you're allowed to, like the Mishnah in the middle did it. But I said, I have another brayse. But how do we learn? So again, not the Rishonim will learn, not that we're arguing all the time, but Abaye is saying the brayse that you bring me doesn't in any way repudiate what we just said before. So we're working our way through. But time there's another brayse. Do not make replicas of images of things above. So we see we're not talking about the four chayes in the Merkava. We're talking about things above, of the Malachi, for example. Again, no Rashi, no kasha from there about the sun and the moon. There's different. We learn more chagig, but there are 7 levels of the heaven. So they're talking about over here with Malachim. That's the highest level of heaven. That's in the holy world of Atzilus, Bri, Etzira. or a Asiya Ruchnius. We're talking about those kind of images, because a malach has sort of a human form with wings. But the lower levels of the heaven, which is the moon and the sun and the stars, is permitted. Says the Gemara, you tell me the lower levels is permitted, the sun and the moon. Is that permitted? But time we learned in the heaven, it says clearly here that comes to add the sun, the moon, the stars, umazolas and constellations. Then Mimal, and that's B'Shemayim, and Mimal above that is Malachim. Clearly here, you're not allowed to build replicas of the sun and the moon. Says the Gemara, the Tanya, he of them. That's talking about worshiping. You're not allowed to make those things if your intention is to worship them. That's what he's talking about here. Says the Gemara, if you're talking about worshiping, then why dafka malachim or celestial bodies? Anything, you're not allowed to even make a replica of a worm, because if you're planning to worship it, because it says, you're right. If you're making it in order to worship it, you're not allowed. Include mountains and hills, yamim and seas and rivers. And all of these things are forbidden. And afikim, and what do you call afikim and ugoyes, and we have here afikim are little like canals and regayes and valleys, metachas from beneath lerabum metachas. So that's ba'aretz. We cover the whole aretz, the whole gamut. And then mitachas underneath, l'rabba shushul cotton, even a small worm. If you're building replicas in order to worship them, it's forbidden. Says the Gemara. So you're telling me, but here he didn't build it for worshiping. He just built stam, the sun and the moon. Actually, use it to test or to help the Adam to articulate what they saw. So that's permitted. Says the Gemara further. You're telling me just to make it alone is permitted. But Tanya, we learn you don't make replicas of the objects that are in the sky. That's simple. And here it says clearly the sun, the levana, the moon, the stars, the mazolas, and the constellations. And here we're not talking about worshiping, we're just talking about just creating it. Says the Gemara, shiny Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel is different. Maybe you shouldn't build these things, even if it's not for worshiping. But here, Rabbi Gamliel built it himself. He had a goy building it for him. And Teja already asks, this concept that we say in Shabbos, you know, have a goy doing an avera for you, not only an avera in the Torah, even an avera in Rabbanan or Shus, is not limited to Shabbos. It applies to every avera. We'll talk about it by Matzir as well, by the Sachsim. So how can he have a goy if a yid is not allowed to produce these items? How can he have these sculptures, whatever? How can you have a guy doing it for him? So Taisa says here, because of the tzedek mitzvah, you're allowed to. Just like on Shabbos, you're allowed to have, a shvus to shvus. It's also the rabbanon. You're allowed to have a guy doing it for you for a tzedek mitzvah. So this is also for tzedek mitzvah to work out whether the Adam actually saw the moon or not. Says the Gemara. So you're telling me, but if we're going to make it, everything's all right. That's a question. Rabbi Yehuda, the Amoira, who's a student of Rav and a student of Shmuel, he had a signet ring, and he didn't make it. He just bought it in the market. Someone else made it, and yet the Achedim, also like others, made it for him. And yet, Shmuel said to him, Rabbi Yehuda, "Shinina, you clever one, saw me ain't it today?" And he said that you have to somehow or another cut out part of it or chisel part of it off, because it looks like it had a form, and it looks like it's some kind of avodah zarah, even though someone else made it for him. It's usher, because of chshad. How do we know that people think people know that Goy made it? Maybe you made it yourself. So it says here, hasam chaysamay boiletava umishum chshada. In other words, when it comes to a signet ring, there's two kinds. There's one where whatever the form there is for your signature is protruding, or if it's indented. And the difference is when you actually seal, if it's protruding, then the way it goes into the wax and it makes grooves inside the wax. But if it's if your signet ring is indented, then then it goes into the wax and it actually protrudes from the wax. So therefore, the din is as follows. So over there was actually protruding, and we are worried about chshad that people are going to think that he made it himself. Tanya, we learned tabas at a ring. If the signature part of the ring is protruding, also it's forbidden to put it on because people think you made it yourself. But you're allowed to use it to sign with because it makes indents. And if the signature part of it is sunk in, then mutal and nichel are weird because nothing is protruding. But also lachtaboy, you're not allowed to sign because whatever you're signing, the wax is sticking out. So therefore, that there is purely because of a chshad. So the Gemara, and here it isn't. So the Gemara, you're telling me that the only reason there is because of chshad, not because there's a problem with someone else making for you, just a chshad that he made himself. Well, there was a shul known as the Shuf, the Yossi. We'll learn about it in more Megillah. It was a shul that, according to some, was taken with them. Golos Yechonia, they took it with them. They dismantled the shul, they just brought the rocks and stones with them to Babel and rebuilt it. It's called the shul of Shuf, the Yossi, that was destroyed and then rebuilt, or to name a place. It had a statue. Most unfortunately, the statue was just an innocent statue of the king rather than meant to be worshipped. They all entered the shul and they weren't worried about chshad. The Yud tell me there's a problem with chshad. And here they walked in the shul with a statue, and there's a chshad, the people that you might worship it or whatever, and nobody, and they had no issue with that. Says the Gemara, Rabim Shiny, if it's a public place and everybody goes all the time, then nobody will be chayshit that it's there for Avodah Zarah. Says the Gemara, but Rabbi Gamliel Yocharu. Rabbi Gamliel is a Yochid, so why are we worried about chshad? Says the Gemara, Kivan, the Nosihu, Shchichi Rabin Gabei, because they'll give you three answers. Either because he was a Nasi, there was always a lot of people there, so he's not really a Yachid. Or he buys Amo the Prokim Hava, he never kept that as one piece. It was made up of pieces. He only put it together when the Eidim were standing before him, he would put it together and show them. So therefore, it wasn't one piece, and that's not a problem. He buys Amo, he slammed of it. He didn't do it stamazeh for beauty's sake or anything else. He did it in order to learn whether it was a Chodesh or not. And we have a pasuk. You see, it says a pasuk that when you come to Yisrael, you shouldn't learn to do like the abominations that the Goyim did. But if you're doing it in order to learn and to understand, then you are permitted. So that's why Rabbi Gamliel was able to have all of these things with him. So this entire Gemara is a digression from Rosh Hashanah. But we will still continue talking about Kiddush HaChodesh until the end of this Pedic. Everyone enjoy the rest.